In this chapter, you will begin to explore one more measure of macroeconomics, the measure of inflation. You will explore what it is, what the effects are, and how this measure is calculated. So in general, we all sort of have this understanding that inflation essentially means that, well, things are getting more expensive. But it's important for you to realize that what inflation actually means is that on average, prices across the board are increasing. It's not the price of a specific product that's increasing, it's the average level of all prices that's increasing. And we use a measure called the Consumer Price Index in order to determine the rate of inflation. So there is a formula. The Consumer Price Index is essentially how much a market basket of goods costs now relative to how much the market basket of goods cost in a base year. Every period we calculate the Consumer Price Index, and then we use the CPI in order to calculate the rate of inflation. So the formula for the rate of inflation is essentially the difference between the CPI figures divided by the original CPI figure. So as we move from one period to the next period, each period has a consumer price index. And essentially, inflation is the percent increase in the consumer price index. The effects of inflation, as I mentioned, we typically associate with the loss of purchasing power. We're simply not able to buy as much as we once were. But inflation will also affect the value of your wealth, particularly if you have wealth in a positive manner. But if you don't have wealth, inflation actually affects you possibly in a negative manner. And inflation will always affect the rate of interest that you are either going to earn on your savings accounts or your investments, or possibly the interest that you pay on any loans that you might make. There's essentially two main causes of inflation. One is called demand pull. So you'll explore what causes this type of inflation, which essentially means that too much money is chasing too few goods. There's also cost push inflation. So when the costs of production rise and the producers pass those costs on to the consumer, that's called cost push inflation. We also have what's known as hyperinflation, which is essentially when prices are rising at such an extraordinary level that just the whole concept of inflation really doesn't make sense like it once did. So in general, out of this chapter, you should understand what inflation is and how it's measured, as well as the effects and the causes of inflation. We use these measures to determine the level of economic activity.